We're in Hebrews chapter 2, verses 5 to 18. Hebrews chapter 2, verses 5 to 18, which can be found on page 1202 in the church Bibles. It is not to angels that he has subjected the world to come, about which we are speaking. But there is a place where someone has testified. What is mankind that you are mindful of them? A son of man that you care for him? You made them a little lower than the angels. You crowned them with glory and honor, and put everything under their feet. In putting everything under them, God left nothing that is not subject to them. Yet at present, we do not see everything subject to them. But we do see Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor, because he suffered death, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. In bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of their salvation perfect through what he suffered. Both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. He says, I will declare your name to my brothers and sisters. In the assembly I will sing your praises. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again he says, here am I, and the children God has given me. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason he had to be made like them, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted.
Thank you very much, Caitlin, for that reading, and we're going to be exploring it together for a little while. So if you've not got it open in front of you, then now would be a good time. It's page 1202. Let's pray together, shall we? In these last days, God has spoken to us by his Son, Jesus. Father, you are a speaking God, a God with something to say. And we're saying to you that this evening we want to be a listening people. We want to hear what you have to say. And most of all, we want to see Jesus in his incredible glory and majesty and appreciate what he's done for us that can so transform our lives. So speak, we pray, for Jesus' sake. Amen. Woody Allen once said these words. He said, my one regret in life is that I am not someone else. Now, I don't know whether Woody Allen really meant it or whether he was just kind of being Woody Allen-ish. But what's for certain is that there are plenty of people who do mean something pretty much like that. They wish they were somebody else. Often they're not actually sure who they are. In fact, let's make it personal. Often we're not really sure quite who we are. Confusion about our identity as human beings, who I am, confusion runs very deep in our human experience. And I think that confusion underlies a lot of our emotional hang-ups. It also, at a societal level, deepens the divisions between different parts of the human family. It can affect the way that we approach relationships. If I'm not sure who I am and I don't know who you are, how on earth do we relate in a secure kind of way? And it determines our view of ourselves and of other people. Identity, it's a massive issue and we're confused about it. So who exactly are we? Well, there are lots of answers around to that question. I guess postmodernity has tended to say to us that we are our choices. There is no real you. There's just the you that you choose to be. Unrestrained capitalism has another message. It tells us that we are what we possess. I shop, therefore I am. Consistent atheism tells us that we are machines with a mere illusion of personhood. We feel like we're somebody, but it's not really true. We're just pre-programmed machines who think what we think because we're programmed to do that, who feel what we feel because we're programmed to do that. You say that's a bit extreme. Well, here is Francis Crick, the Nobel Prize-winning geneticist, and says these words. He says, in your stream of consciousness, the person isn't there. Man is made up only of these mechanical factors. It isn't just that God is dead. He said man is dead as well, because he becomes simply the product of the original impersonal with only the equally impersonal time and chance. Isn't that depressing? In your stream of consciousness, the person isn't there. That whole thing that we live with all the time, where we think we are somebody, that we possess a certain consciousness, he says, no, it's just an illusion. It's just the firing of neurons in your head. It's all it is. So depressing. Thankfully, the Bible tells a completely different story about what it means to be a human being. And it is, I believe, a story that can give us an anchor point for our identity so that we know who we are. But as we go through it, you'll see it is a story which is both brutally realistic and at the same time full of hope. And because it's both, I find it an incredibly credible story. But let's take a different angle on this for a moment. One of Southampton's more famous characters in history, although probably often forgotten now, is a guy whose statue is up in West Park now. His name was Isaac Watts. He was born in Southampton, and he was educated at King Edward's School up there on Hill Lane. I don't know if it was in Hill Lane then, but anyway, it's still here in Southampton. And Isaac Watts was one of the best hymn writers in the English language. Some of the greatest hymns that we ever sing were written by this man who was educated in Southampton. That's quite cool, isn't it? Yeah, you know that song, When I Survey the Wondrous Cross? Some of you know that? That was one of his. It's an absolute corker. But Isaac Watts sometimes had bad days, in my humble opinion, and here I think was not one of his finest hours. Great God, how infinite art thou? What worthless worms are we? Let the whole race of creatures bow and pay their praise to thee. I grew up singing that song sometimes, but I have a real question about it now. Does our Creator really answer worthless worm to the question, who am I? And what does it mean to be human? I really don't think so. I really don't think so. No, the Bible begins not with human failure to rub our noses in it, but with human dignity. And the Bible ends not with human shame to make us feel even worse, but with human glory and hope. And between those bookends, it offers a message not of despair, but of vibrant, pulsating hope for us human beings. We ask the question, who am I? Listen, why not let your Creator answer that question for once? Lots of people all around you want to answer that question, but is there anybody better to answer it than the one who made you? God, your Creator. This evening we're going to hear Him and let Him answer that question. So who am I? Well, the first answer the Bible gives to that question is that we are awesome. We are awesome. We're going to come at this question through 5 different kind of lenses, 5 different views. And here is the first one, the creation view. And that says we human beings are awesome. Now, I know this is a very overused word today, isn't it? Everything is awesome, yeah? And it's slightly devalued currency. But honestly, this is what Hebrews says about human beings. It says we are awesome. Have a look at verses 6 to 8. It's a quotation from an ancient poem. What is mankind's, human beings, that you are mindful of them? A son of man that you care for them? You made them a little lower than the angels, and you crowned them with glory and honor. That's what God says about human beings, first of all. God crowned them with glory. Now, usually in the Bible, the word glory is reserved for God himself. But God crowned us with glory and with honor. We were made to be awesome. Now, you may remember, if you were here last week, that the people that this book that we call Hebrews was first written for were obsessing slightly about angels. And in chapter 1, as we were looking last week, the writer was saying, look, don't get so hung up on angels because Jesus is better. But here in this chapter, he's kind of taking that argument even further. He's saying, not only is Jesus better than the angels, but actually, if we've got our trust in him, we are given a glory that even the angels do not share. Isn't that amazing? We have a glory as human beings that the angels do not share. Let's just follow the line of thought through for a moment. Chapter 2, verse 5. It isn't to angels, he's still talking about angels, it isn't to angels that God has subjected the world to come about which we are speaking. What's he saying there? Well, the world to come here isn't so much kind of another world, it's this world as it's meant to be. New creation, kind of everything put right. So who's in charge in the world as it's meant to be? And the amazing answer is that it isn't the angels who are in charge. It's meant to be us, human beings. That's the point of verses 6 to 8. Let's have it again. What is mankind that you are mindful of them? A son of man, you care for them. Sometimes we read that as if it's saying, human beings. What are human beings that God should care about them? God's not interested in them. But that isn't what the psalm is saying. Not at all. The psalm is saying, look, yeah, we human beings, we kind of make a bit of a mess of things sometimes, don't we? And we're aware of our limitations. So what is it about us that means that God is mindful of us, that He thinks about us? What is it about human beings that means that God cares for us? He's saying, I don't get it. Why should God care for us when clearly he does? And then he goes on to explain. Verse 7, God, you made them a little lower than the angels. We don't look as glorious as angels, I don't think. Certainly I don't. Can't speak for the rest of you, but to be honest, you don't either. But you made them a little lower than the angels, but you crowned them with glory and honor. You made them awesome, and you put everything under their feet. In other words, they were meant to reign in creation. When creation is as God wants it to be, we human beings have the incredible glory and dignity of being responsible for it, being in charge, ruling in creation. We were created to be awesome. Now, that isn't talking about exploiting the planet selfishly for our own kind of competitive ends. It's talking about looking after the planet, using its resources well and responsibly on God's behalf. He's entrusted it to us. Let's get a bit personal. Do you think, when God thinks of you, that frankly he's pretty down on you? When God thinks of you, he just thinks miserable sinner, hopeless failure, hopeless case, basket case, hospital pass, write them off. Do you think that's what God thinks about when he thinks of you? Many of us do think that that's the way God thinks about us. Or that if you become a Christian, God wants to turn you into a sort of dull, monochrome kind of nerd with a Eeyore view of everybody else, because all that he's got to say about us is that we're wicked and sinful. Is that what we think is God's attitude to us human beings? I want to say, no way is that his attitude. God's agenda is to lift us and give us dignity, not to crush us and diminish us. He wants us crowned with glory and honor, ruling with him in wisdom and creativity and beauty, because he's like that. And he wants us to be like him, crowned with glory and honor. And I need to remember that. I need to remember that God created every human being to be crowned with glory and honor. Every time that I'm tempted to dismiss another person because there's something I don't like about them, or because they're not like me or something, they're crazy, or they're boring, or they're too ordinary, or they're too successful, or they're too intellectual, or they're too superficial, and I just want to write them off and say, no, I can't do that. They are made in the image of God, and they are crowned with glory and honor. They were made to be awesome. And I mustn't ever forget that. And there mustn't be one single exception. But of course, this is one side of the story. And if we're honest, we all know that there's another side of the story as well. Yes, we were created to be awesome. But the truth about us also, sorry if this is a bit corny, but the truth about us also is that we're awful. Awful. This is the second view, the de-creation view. This is the kind of everything's unraveled and gone wrong kind of view. Will you let me show you my holiday snaps for a moment? Is that okay? Okay, you're going to like this one. A few weeks ago, Alice and I had the privilege of being in the Caribbean, or they said we should call it the Caribbean, not the Caribbean, on the Cayman Islands. Nice, isn't it? And to be honest, it was quite a kind of tropical paradise there. I won't go on. Unless you want to hear a little bit. No. But when we started talking to people who lived there, we found everybody who had lived there more than 15 years, they had a story to tell about Hurricane Ivan. Don't know if you remember Hurricane Ivan. 2004, Hurricane Ivan tore through the Cayman Islands and turned this tropical paradise into this total wasteland. In just a few minutes, 70% of the island was underwater. Houses everywhere were reduced to rubble. Roofs were flying through the air. It was awful. But it was awful in that double sense. Awful in the sense that it was grim to live through, but awful also in that sense that it was kind of breathtaking. That somewhere so magnificent could be ruined so absolutely in just a few seconds. Awful, kind of breathtaking. And it's rather the same with us as human beings. It's awful what's happened to us in both of those senses. Have a look at verse 8. Everything was put under our feet. In putting everything under them, God left nothing that's not subject to them. In other words, we were meant to rule over everything, yet at present, we do not see everything subject to them. That's the awful bit, isn't it? In other words, we were created for something absolutely awesome, but we have fallen drastically short of it. Drastically short of it. We turned our glory into shame. And in a kind of split-second decision, though we were made to be awesome, we were ruined. And it's kind of breathtaking that something created to be so awesome could end up so flawed that it would produce a North Korea, a Cambodia, a Pol Pot, a Hitler. But actually all the mess in my heart as well, and in yours. Breathtaking what's happened to us. And this, of course, is the story of Genesis chapter 3, right at the beginning of the Bible, where it talks about the choice that we made right at the beginning of the human story. A choice to walk away from God and the life he had given us to enjoy, in which we would honor him and glorify him and love him and obey him. How we walked away from that, and instead of having God at the center, we said, no, we're going to be at the center instead, and we really don't need God in charge at all. Let's push him right away. And that choice that we made, a little bit like Hurricane Ivan, tearing through the Caribbean. This choice has torn through our humanity with appalling consequences for us personally, for creation, for our relationships, so that now, instead of creation being kind of led wisely and people living together in harmony and knowing who they are and feeling secure about themselves, we don't see that anymore. No, instead we see the planet under great strain. We see human relationships broken and shattered. We see people in pain, not even knowing who we are. It's a mess, a disaster zone. It's awful. That's this week's news, isn't it? And it's every week's news. It happens all the time. And I guess for me, that means that I shouldn't be too surprised, and I shouldn't just go off the deep end every time I'm disappointed with another person. Because actually, this is part of the whole of the human story. We're all caught up in it. We're all a mess. And actually, in one sense, it means I shouldn't kind of just go off the deep end every time I'm disappointed with myself, as I sometimes am, because I'm part of this as well. It's part of our human story. We are messed up, and so we do mess up. It's pretty depressing, isn't it? Is there any hope? Is there any human being in history who bucks this trend, who can take us back to the ideal that we saw in Psalm 8, quoted there in verses 6 to 8? Well, thankfully, yes, there is. And we're going to look now at the Jesus view. And the Jesus view tells us that, yes, we were created to be awesome. Yes, we've messed up and it's awful, but God has not dumped us. God has not given up on us. There is hope. Let me put a few images up on the screen here. You've got the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989. You've got Nelson Mandela becoming president of South Africa. You've got Aung San Suu Kyi becoming leader of Myanmar. And I'm old enough to remember all of those moments. And as I reflect back on them, in each one of them, at the time, they seemed like some of the most hopeful moments in the last kind of 30 or 40 years of history. Moments where you thought, hey, things might just get better. Well, of course, in reality, all of those things have in some ways kind of unraveled a bit and disappointed us. But verse 9 describes for us another moment a little bit like that. But here's a moment that doesn't unravel into disappointment. Verse 9. Go from verse 8. At present, we do not see everything subject to human beings, but, verse 9, we do see Jesus, who was made lower than the angels for a little while, now crowned with glory and honor, just like we were meant to be at the beginning. And we see Jesus now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death so that by the grace of God, he might taste death for everyone. We do not see everything subject to us. Human beings are awful, we're in a mess. But we do see Jesus, and he is crowned with glory and honor. The first, we don't see everything subject to us. That's a vision of failed humanity. But the second, we do see Jesus crowned with humanity. That's a crown with glory and honor. That's a vision of authentic humanity, real humanity, what we were meant to be. And we can see it in Jesus. He is the eternal Son of God, as we saw in chapter 1. And yet, he became like us. He became a human being. But unlike us, he is the perfect, unflawed image of God, radiating God's goodness and majesty, crowned with glory and honor. That is what being human is meant to be. People in perfect relationship with God, obeying him with perfect joy, and so crowned with glory and honor. But for him, for Jesus, that obedience meant suffering. Middle of verse 9, now crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. How come he is crowned with glory and honor because he suffered death? That doesn't seem to compute, does it? Normally, we don't think death, oh, glory and honor. Doesn't kind of normally stack up like that for us. But it does for Jesus because his death is for everyone. End of verse 9, so that by the grace of God he might taste death for everyone. Death, you see, is our final enemy as human beings, separating us from God forever. But Jesus has tasted that death for us so that we can go free from its power. Yeah, we might be an awful mess, but we are not dumped by God. God hasn't given up on us. Jesus has come to rescue us and bring us home to God. And because he did that, because he obeyed the Father's plan perfectly, Jesus, the ultimate human being, is crowned with glory and honor and is now worshipped by millions of angels in heaven who cry, "Worthy is the Lamb who was slain, who was slaughtered. Worthy is he to receive power and wealth and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and praise." When we look at humanity through the Jesus view, hope begins to shine again. We realize God hasn't given up on us, but has come to sort out the mess. Fourth view, what are we like as human beings? Well, once we begin this journey with Jesus, we are work in progress. Okay, that's realistic. Yeah, I'm work in progress. I am a long way off the finished article. I'm very, very flawed, but God is at work in me. He's changing me. I'm at work in progress. And if you're trusting in Jesus, that's true of you as well. You've got lots of flaws too. You mess up, I mess up, we mess up, but God's at work. We are work in progress. Calling this the recreation view. I love this image by the French artist Bernard Prat. I don't know if that's how you say his name. I was trying to sound a bit French. It's a portrait of a guy called Satigi Kouate, who was a Malian actor. I confess I've never heard of him, but I like the image. He died in 2010. But the thing I like about this image is the portrait is made up of trash that has been discarded, bits of clothes and rags and broken glass and china. But the artist has painstakingly got hold of all this trash and put it together to create what I think is a really striking image of this actor. It's a pretty good picture, I think, of what Jesus wants to do with the broken fragments of a human race spoiled by selfishness and what we call sin, putting ourselves in God's place. But Jesus takes those broken fragments and he is painstakingly working to build us back together to become again what he created us to be. To build us back to become the amazing image of God, reflecting his glory in the whole of creation. That is what Jesus is about. When we start journeying with him, we become work in progress. He's putting the pieces back together. How do I know that? Because it says it in verse 10, that Jesus is bringing many sons and daughters, human beings, to glory. Remember that word glory? It's what we were meant to be crowned with at the beginning, but what we messed up and threw away through turning away from God. But Jesus is bringing many sons and daughters back to glory. He's recreating us, renewing us, changing us, reassembling the whole of our humanity to make us again what we were created to be. How does he do that? Verse 10, in bringing many sons and daughters to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the pioneer of our salvation, that's Jesus, perfect through what he suffered. Now, there's quite a lot in that verse. I'm not going to be able to unpack all of the detail, but the key thing is that it happens through his suffering. When it talks about Jesus being made perfect, it doesn't mean that Jesus was morally impure, but it means that there was a process that he had to go through to be prepared to put us back together as human beings. And that was a process that was immensely costly to him. It was a process of suffering at many different levels. So why is it fitting, to use the language here, that Jesus was prepared to save us through suffering. What was this process he went through? Well, first of all, he identified with us completely. This is the image of him as our brother, verses 11 to 13. In order to rescue us, he had to become one of us. He had to enter the suffering of our broken world and become a human being. Verse 11, both the one who makes people holy and those who are made holy, in other words, Jesus and us, are of the same family. So Jesus isn't ashamed to call them brothers and sisters. Here's the first part in his journey of suffering. He enters our humanity. He becomes one of us. He puts his arm around us and says, yep, I'm with you. My brother, my sister. I identify with you. That's the first stage in the journey. But then the second stage, he liberates and restores us by becoming our champion, the one who sets us free. Have a look at verses 14 and 15. Since the children, the brothers and sisters, have flesh and blood, Jesus too shared in their humanity, so that by his death he might break the power of him who holds the power of death, that is the devil, and free those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. If you don't get anything from those verses, you can get this. Jesus came to set you free from your slavery of the fear of death. That's what it says, yeah? He's the champion. The one who came to set us free from the grip of death. So he identifies with us as our brother. He sets us free from the power of death through his death as our champion. And then finally, verses 17 and 18, he represents us as the ultimate priest. Verse 17, for this reason he had to be made like us, fully human in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. A priest is someone who stands between God and human beings. And for Jesus to become the ultimate priest, he had to be the God who became a man, so that he could join heaven and earth, God and humanity. He had to go through that journey of suffering, becoming one of us, in order to be the priest that we needed, who would bring us back to God. This is what Jesus has done for us. He has identified with us as our brother. He has rescued us through his death on the cross from the power of death. And as our priest, he brings us back to God. Our brother, our champion, our priest. And he's done it for us. And did you notice in verse 16 he says, surely it's not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. He's saying, look, you guys, you're also hung up on the angels, but look at Jesus. He did all this stuff not for the angels, but for you. That's how important he thinks you are. That's how much human beings matter to him. He's not serving the angels, but he is serving you by becoming one of you, by setting you free, by bringing you back to God as your great priest. Jesus surpasses the angels in his authority. He bypasses the angels in salvation, but he has come to rescue us and give us the glory for which we were made. So it isn't only that Jesus is more glorious than the angels. If our trust is in Jesus, we will be more glorious than them too, because we're going to share his glory. How does that make you feel about being a human being? Well, let me tell you about Dave. He's here this evening. He's a great guy. I really like him. A number of years ago, Dave went through some hard times. And in those hard times, gradually, the drink and the drugs got him and ground him down. When we first got to know him, it was a massive struggle for him. But it's been wonderful over the years to get to know Dave and see God at work in his life. He's been involved in Big Breakfast. He's been involved, came along to Alpha. He's been involved in More to Life. And not so long ago, 3 or 4 months ago, Dave finally put his trust in Jesus. And Jesus is putting him back together. He's been free from the drink and drugs for months now. And he's a great guy, and he's getting to know God better. Dave, just like me, and just like you if you're a Christian, he's work in progress. Evidence that God hasn't dumped us human beings. Even when life gets really messy, he still cares. And he's the great restorer who's putting us back together. And if you don't yet know him, let me tell you, he could do that for you as well. Final lens that we're going to look at, and just very quickly, it's the new creation view. Verse 10, we've already seen it, but just dwell here a moment longer. In bringing many sons and daughters to glory. That's what it says. Just let those words, sons and daughters and glory, just let them sit on you for a couple of minutes. Feel their weight. Feel their significance. Romans 8 tells us that creation is longing for the day when we are fully and finally remade as the children of God. When we wake up and smell the coffee and begin to take our place and reign properly in creation. It's going to be good news for us. It's going to be good news for our relationships. It's going to be good news for creation, because at last we human beings will reach our destiny and fulfill the purpose for which we were made. And Revelation tells us that at the same time, the whole of creation is going to be remade. And we then will live within that new creation in gleaming glory, in unending joy, in a world with no more mourning or crying or sorrow and pain, in which we will rule with Jesus, totally fulfilled, totally satisfied, totally glorious, crowned with glory and honor. That is human destiny. And if you're a human being, I think most of you are, and if your trust is in Jesus, that is your destiny too. No more mourning, no more sorrow, no more pain, no more addiction, no more brokenness, no more betrayal, but face-to-face intimacy with the God who made you for himself and who loves you like no other. Glorious dignity as you join with him in ruling creation and making it all that he intends for it to be. There is no more compelling vision of human identity than this one. Who am I? Well, identity confusion is not surprising if we take the Bible story seriously as it. Because it tells us that we were made for God-like glory, but we chose the path of shame and rebellion instead. So there's this fundamental fracture right at the heart of who we believe ourselves to be. But God, the great restorer, hasn't dumped us, hasn't given up on us, but has come in Jesus to remake us, to reassemble all those bits of our broken humanity into something beautiful that will bear his image and radiate his majesty and glory forever and ever and ever. Friend, you can look in 1,000 places to find out who you are. But I tell you, if you do, ultimately it's only going to deepen your confusion. But there is another choice. You can look to your Creator to tell you who you are. And if you let him, if you're willing to face the brokenness and let him deal with it, if you put your trust in Jesus and journey with him, he will put you back together, bit by bit, piece by piece, crowning you with a glory that surpasses even the glory of the angels. Doesn't get any better than that, does it? Why would we push it away? Tom's going to come and lead us in response and worship. Thank you.
Thanks, John. I'd like us just to kind of carry on paying attention. There's always that tendency when a sermon ends to sort of exhale and then switch off maybe, but let's not do that. Let's carry on. If we can keep that slide up. and just wherever you are, maybe with someone next to you if you like, but on your own as well, that's fine. Just spend some time praying. Look at this list. Is that how you see yourself? Which one of those do you need to pray into and dwell on more, maybe? Maybe just take a moment now, just in the quiet, to pray. Maybe you've never put your trust in Jesus before. Maybe you've never found your identity in him, handed yourself over to him, or maybe you've known him for years. Wherever you are with the Lord, maybe just pray these words along with me in your heart. Father, thank you that you love me. Thank you that you made me glorious. Thank you that when you look at me, you see someone that you deeply love. But Lord, I've messed up. I'm a glorious ruin. But thank you that you haven't thrown me out. Father, thank you for your Son and that he died for me. I trust in him and his blood and what he did for me, and that he is making me like himself, perfect and holy. And I put all of my hope and my trust in him, because he suffered for me.